You might remember over a year ago, we actually covered it here on the show, the Business Roundtable, which is the lobbyist organization for the biggest Fortune 500 companies here in Washington, D.C., also headed by former George W. Bush's chief of staff, just, to throw that out there. They said they were going to commit themselves to, quote, stakeholder capitalism, where they were going to have a stakeholder in their workers. Well, it's been over a year, and it spawned all these takes. Big business says they're going to invest in their workers, all of that.
Great PR.
Well, yeah, fantastic PR. The New York Times just comes out with a very interesting new piece. Stakeholder capitalism gets a report card. It's not good. They basically go through many of the companies that were within there, the statements of purpose that they've put out, Krystal, and it turns out that none of it ended up happening on the ground with many of these companies, especially in the time of coronavirus. It's just absolutely shocking. The study concludes, quote, the Business Roundtable statement has failed to deliver fundamental shifts in corporate purpose in a moment of grave crisis when enlightened purpose should be paramount. I cannot think of it better well said than that.
Well, and they go into very specific examples here. So Mark Benioff, who's the CEO of Salesforce, who's been sort of the driving force behind this view, which is like, look, we can still have capitalism just like it is within the current system as it's structured, but we're just going to also focus on these other stakeholders and, whether it's the environment, diversity, the workforce, et cetera. And we're going to put those on par with shareholders because, the current model is basically everything for the shareholder, everything to increase share price, anything is justified in order to increase profit margins. So we're just going to put them on a par with that. And that way, we don't have to really change anything. Corporations can be trusted to do what's in the best interest of these other stakeholders. And Mark Benioff himself this year during coronavirus, well, I believe their profit, I believe Salesforce is actually doing incredibly well during coronavirus, but that didn't stop him from laying off 1,000 employees, by the way, as, supposedly one of his stakeholders. So it just shows you that oftentimes these efforts end up being more of a corporate PR initiative than any sort of reality around, change in corporate behavior. Obviously, we've covered it here extensively with Amazon, which is, the great global giant at this point, where they were all in on signaling support for the Black Lives Matter movement, putting it up on their home screen, all of that. But of course, we know, because we've had Chris Smalls on this show, the reality of their treatment of the disproportionately Black and brown working class people who do the grunt work, who do the real work of moving goods through their distribution centers, through Amazon warehouses. Ask them about whether they feel that their lives matter to Amazon, and you may get a very different picture here.
Or spying on them if they try to form a union.
Oh, right? My God. Yeah, that one is crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. And you can go and you can read this new report where they single out people like Wells Fargo for rejecting the shareholder proposal whenever they actually put it forward to their board. And in most cases, what this report shows, almost none of the companies that are part of the Business Roundtable even submitted that statement to their governing boards for approval to try and enact some of this whenever it comes down to it. So remember, this is all just empty fluff. It's BS. We knew it at the time, and they were trying to co-opt what was the obvious feelings in the country. But when whenever it really comes down to it, in the middle of the pandemic, during crunch time, how did every single one of them act? All of their stock prices are up too.
This is maybe the most damning thing. So this is the 1,000 employees that were laid off. In late August, Salesforce celebrated more than $5 billion in quarterly sales. Doing great, no problem.
Pretty well.
Credible profit margins, stock through the roof. Mark Benioff proclaimed validation. This is a victory for stakeholder capitalism, he said in a television interview. The next day, they informed 1,000 employees that their jobs were no longer needed. So there you go. If you ever want to know what these corporate bosses really think about stakeholder capitalism and having workers have a voice and power and a real seat at the table, just ask them what they think about unions, and you will know everything that you need to know about their actual commitment to these values.
That's well said.
All right, we'll have more Rising for you after this.